It was 2 o'clock. So, are we, Ms. Battles, are we waiting on somebody, or? Yeah, I'm just wondering about. Are we waiting on anybody? Mr. Franz, are we good? We do have a Okay, good. Okay, good. I want to welcome everyone to the October 25th, 2017 meeting of the Agency Operations Committee and remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast live via the internet. So before we approve the minutes, I was having a discussion with Ms. Battles just a few minutes ago, and when we did the evaluation, hello, doctor. When we did the evaluation of the commissioner, at least one of our board members mentioned that maybe we were rushing through some of our meetings. And so what I wanted to mention to you all, I feel a responsibility when I'm chairing the meeting to try to, and we've actually got a schedule here where there's a time for each item, and I'm trying to hold through to that, and the reason I'm doing that is to try to be respectful of your time. So sometimes you'll see me trying to move it along. So what I just want, but I don't want to stifle any kind of discussion, so I just wanted to encourage each of you, if you feel like I'm doing that and it's not, you know, you want more time on something, don't hesitate to jump right in and tell me, no, we're not going to move to the next item. I still want to talk about this one.
I'm thinking maybe the opposite way. I like your approach, moving through, keeping on the timeline. That's just me.
Well, that's me too, but I just didn't want to stifle any kind of discussion or someone feel like that we haven't really thoroughly talked about some issue. Okay, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the July 26, 2017 Agency Operations Committee. Has everybody had an opportunity to look at the minutes? Do I have a motion for approval? Okay, by Mr. Stedman, second by Mr. Anwar. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. The next item on our agenda is public testimony. We've not received any requests for public testimony, so we will move on to the next item. The next item under agency operations is consideration of adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee relating to an amendment to the board operating policies and procedures. Ms. Battles is available for questions. And why don't you just go ahead and, can you summarize this?
It essentially puts into the policies the procedure for evaluating the commissioner on an annual basis. So it's essentially the same process that you followed last month, I believe. No other changes were made to this document, and they can be found redlined on page 10.
On page 10?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it wouldn't take long to say just to read it, the board is responsible for the annual performance evaluation of the Commissioner of Higher Education. The Secretary of the Board shall develop the evaluation form and disseminate it to board members. Each board member shall complete the form and return it to the Secretary. The Secretary will combine and average the scores and include any comments without attributing the comments to a particular board member. The board members shall meet. The board shall meet in executive session to discuss the Commissioner's performance evaluation. The board is also responsible for setting the Commissioner's annual compensation to an amount not to exceed the amount authorized in the General Appropriations Act. So that's it.
Yes, sir.
Any discussion? If there's no discussion, do I have a motion? Well, are y'all taking time to read it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It was excellent. No.
Are you making the motion?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a motion by Mr. Anwar and second by Dr. Farias. Any further discussion or any discussion? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The next item is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to proposed amendments to Chapter 25, Subchapter A, Section 25.4 of Board Rules concerning the optional retirement program. And we have Ms. Tonya Skaperlanda, who's our Director of Human Resources, and so you're available for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Would you like for her to come up?
And just so that the committee members know, these rules were actually adopted by the board in July on an emergency basis.
Okay.
And so you've seen this before. We've done a presentation to explain them before. We put them back out to the Texas Register for the full comment period, and we didn't receive any comments.
I've got,
Would you come forward, ma'am? Okay. And while she's coming forward, Ms. Battles, can you do like a 2-minute summary of what this is all about?
So unless Tonya, I'll just defer to Tonya.
Could you give us the summary of what all this is about?
There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
So back, the 85th legislature passed Senate Bill 1954, which enacted, it put restrictions on a person's ability to elect ORP in lieu of TRS at the institutions, in lieu of ERS here at the coordinating board. So ORP is a retirement program that some faculty and staff at institutions of higher education can provide or can choose in lieu of the traditional pension program. And the Senate bill enacted rules in the past. It was kind of an open-ended timeframe. If an institution forgets to offer ORP to one of their new employees or an employee that's in a new position that has the ability to elect ORP, it was kind of open-ended to where there was no time frame in which they had to elect ORP within if the institution made a mistake. And the legislation put rules in place that said if the institution makes a mistake and makes an administrative error and does not offer ORP to a participant, then there's time frames in which it has to happen or they cannot elect ORP. And some of that came from TRS saying we were getting requests 2 years later to put people in ORP that had been previously for 2 years in TRS. And so our rules are changing to be in compliance with the legislative change.
All right, good summary. Any questions?
I'm just curious. So the ORP is a defined contribution plan, and the Texas retirement system is a defined benefit plan?
Yes.
How many people sign up for the defined contribution, the ORP?
I don't have the exact numbers. We do reports
Roughly.
annually. I'd say 30,000 statewide, and that's a very rough guess.
Out of 100,000 or anyway? I'm just curious.
I can get you that information actually very quickly. I just don't have it.
No, I'm just.
That's not something that she would necessarily know, right? Because you're focused on our agency. So.
And we do keep an annual report on people who elect ORP in lieu of TRS, that each institution submits a report to us, and we're in the process of gathering that information now. It was actually
But you can get that to Mr. Stedman
yes.
pretty quickly after this meeting.
I'm curious because typically, the defined benefit, or defined contribution, you take the risk that you can do better than the guaranteed benefit.
The percent who elect it is shrinking. The percent that elect ORP are less and less, especially in the community colleges.
I would have thought, but yeah, that'd be interesting.
And I could at least get you last year's report. We're still in the process of gathering information for this year's report.
All right, so this requires a motion for the approval of the proposed amendments regarding the optional retirement program. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Stedman, second. Second by Mr. Anwar. Any discussion, further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. That was a good summary. Yeah. You could maybe email it to him or... The next item under agency operations is a report on grants and contracts, including those exceeding $1 million. This item does not require any action, and Mr. Bill Franz, our general counsel, is available for questions. Any questions? We've got that list up here, right? Okay. Do y'all want to take a minute or two just to look through it, or are we okay with it?
It's mostly formula funding stuff, right? I mean, most of that, it's all formula funding. Yeah.
Well, no, not formula. Well, the community college's 10-pay is in there, I believe, and we have also all the trusteed grants and contracts.
Okay.
I see that Dr. Farias and Mr. Anwar are looking at it, so just let us know when you're ready. Yeah. Okay. How about you, Doctor? All good? Okay. So there's no action on this, so we'll move to the next item, and it's the last item under agency operations, is an update on the key initiatives recommended by NTT Data regarding the agency's cybersecurity framework. This item also does not require any action. Ms. Sun will update the committee on the progress made on implementing the key initiatives recommended by NTT Data. Ms. Sun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, board members. In spring 2017, NTT
Is your microphone on? It sounds
Yes, I
okay.
turn it on. Can you hear me?
Maybe move a little bit closer.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. In spring 2017, NTT Data, a vendor contracted by the Department of Information Resources, conducted a assessment on the agency's cybersecurity infrastructure at our agency. So they were using the Texas Cybersecurity Framework. So on June 28th, in a special called board meeting, NTT Data presented their final report and the recommendations to the board members. The Texas Cybersecurity Infrastructure Framework, was introduced after the pass of Senate Bill 1134, which required the Department of Information Resources to put together strategies and a framework for the state agency to use in order to secure the cyber infrastructure. So DIR subsequently worked with a group of subject matter experts and put together the framework for the state. In summary, THECB received scores higher than the state agency average in 34 out of the 40 objectives as outlined in the Texas Cybersecurity Framework. We received scores equal to the state agency average in 3 objectives, and there are 3 areas where we received scores lower than the state agency average, which will require us to make some major improvement in this fiscal year. And the 3 areas are security awareness and training, identification and authentication, and the cybersecurity incident response. So based on the recommendations provided by NTT, we put together an implementation roadmap, which is composed of 9 major initiatives. In order to keep all the board members informed of the latest progress, it's our plan to present progress report on a quarterly basis during this fiscal year. So today, we're going to present the first quarterly progress report. While overall we are making steady and good progress in meeting the objectives and goals as outlined in the implementation plan, due to the hiring freeze, the pace of progress has not been as fast as we had hoped. The security analyst position on the information security team has been vacant ever since January this year. After the governor's office lifted the hiring freeze, we've been trying very hard and trying to refill that position. So it's our hope that sometime in November, the information security team will become again fully staffed. Now I'm going to ask my colleague, Mr. John House, the agency information security officer, to present the first quarterly progress report to the board.
So, Ms. Sun.
Yes.
So who's responsible in this agency for cybersecurity? Is it you?
Me as the information resource manager and John House as the information security officer, we're responsible.
You would be,
for the-
if there was some issue with it, you all are our main
we
points of
have,
contact?
We have a cyber security incident response plan, so we will follow the plan if we think there is a data breach or cybersecurity incident.
So most organizations now are very concerned about this. Other boards that I'm involved with, I'm sure Mr. Stedman's seeing it too. But often when you get a report like this, I know, Mr. Counsel, we can go into executive session to hear a report, but as you go through this, are you revealing any weaknesses or anything that we would be concerned about discussing in a public meeting?
Okay, so I just want to make it clear that on June 28th, when we had the special call to board meeting,
Right.
we were having a executive session, which is not broadcast to the general public, where NTT Data and me and John attend the meeting and reviews some more details, on the vulnerabilities
Right.
we identified in the agency's cybersecurity infrastructure.
Probably all of us were at that
But
meeting.
the progress report itself, our plan is to provide a general update, to the board members. But towards the end of this fiscal year, we're going to compile a formal report with detailed information to submit to the board members for review. But to answer your question, during this session, we're not going to include any details regarding the cyber infrastructure at the agency.
So, Ms. Battles, you're nodding your head. So you've thought all this through?
Yes, sir. And that's one of my first questions when I asked whether we needed to have an executive session on their presentation, and that was the response that I received. So I'm comfortable with going ahead and presenting.
So, yeah, at the proper time, for example, I might ask you a very general question like, what is our biggest risk right now in this area? But I'm not going to ask that today in an open session, right?
Okay.
Okay, but go ahead with your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you and good afternoon. This is a progress report for items that are on the FY18 first quarter of the roadmap for the fiscal year. The NTT data assessment recommended policies and procedure and framework development, and we've made progress in our policies and procedures. Information security governance was formalized at the agency with the change to the Information Technology Steering Committee charter. And the Information Technology Steering Committee meets pretty much quarterly here at the agency, and they direct priority of information technology projects. They will be considering security risk, changing legal requirements, and they'll be monitoring the progress of our security initiatives. We have an information security charter now. Security policies for configuration management, incident response were updated. NTT Data recommended security procedures, and we've updated many of our security procedures, incident response planning, data loss prevention, procedures like this. Security risk assessment is it's an annual process here at THECB, and NTT Data had some advice on how we handle security risk assessment. And we've developed a practical tool, and we're going to classify applications and systems based on a number of security criteria, and we're going to use this to prioritize controls and assessment of controls that we have on our applications and systems. Part of the risk assessment initiative is to include data owners at the agency so they're aware of a system's inherent risk and the controls that are applied to that system. NTT Data recommended role-based training, and this is a big, well, it's a part of the Texas Cybersecurity Framework, role-based security training. And our first quarter exercise or initiative was we presented sessions on safeguarding sensitive personally identifiable information to agency staff. And the next phase will be to do more role-based training for data owners at the agency to teach them, well, to let them know what their roles are in protecting data at the agency.
So, but Mr. House, and this is another thing they're talking about. So when you say role-based, It's a type of training where you're actually sort of,
Well, I believe a lot of agencies have just a general security awareness training for
where they just put
everyone.
things up and say, this is what you need to know, but this is
Yeah.
where you sort of,
And we have a training for each employee. It's fairly brief. And this role-based training, you go out to people that have a role, of an important role in security, and let them know, what their responsibilities are.
but it's not actually sort of going through scenarios where it's that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah, we're giving practical advice on safeguarding sensitive information at the agency, and your goal should be to, NTT data wants us to change behavior, and so we're going to be focusing on things we can do to change behavior if it's needed. And role-based training is going to move into people that have big security responsibilities, like system administrators. We need to, the incident response team will be doing a lot of training for our incident response team on how we handle security incidents.
Yeah, I think the word I was thinking about was like you don't do things like simulations where you actually,
Yeah, we're planning on doing that in our incident response training, and we'll be doing simulations of security incidents and walkthroughs of our response plans and things such as that.
So we are developing the security role-based training, so it's not only each individual staff member, like John mentioned, we're trying to understand from the business perspective what kind of role they have, according to the cybersecurity framework. So take the safeguarding sensitive PII information training. John did manage to introduce, questions and Q&A and real-life scenario during the training. So to a certain degree, I have to say there was interaction between the trainer and the people in the room.
that's what I was trying to get at, as opposed to just sort of lecturing people about it, to actually
We
be
want it
involved
to
in
be very
exercises.
practical. They know what to do when things happen.
Asset inventory, and our first step is to do a survey of USB devices, and we're in progress on a survey. The risk assessment is going to pull in, we're going to build a data inventory in our risk assessment process, and it's going to pull owners in and let them know what their data assets are, and it'll lead to efforts to manage applications and databases that may no longer be in use. And that's part of the risk assessment process that we've built this year. Configuration hardening standards for applications and systems will be prioritized based on the risk assessment as well, and we expect to complete system security plans, and these will include data flow documentation as we progress into Q2 of the roadmap. With management support, we're making good progress with the information security program, and we'll continue to improve with progress on these roadmap as we implement these roadmap initiatives. And we're happy to answer any questions you may have on this progress report.
So it sounds like you all have been doing a lot of work, and so just to ask you sort of an open-ended question, how would you characterize your progress in this area? Are you happy with where you are right now?
It's an intimidating list of initiatives, and I think we're taking on some of the more difficult ones in this first quarter, and certainly the risk assessment's one of the tougher tasks, and we had it marked at risk, and we'll be doing good to finish the risk assessment this quarter. I think we're on track. Some of these other policies and procedures, those are pretty easy to knock out. But something like the risk assessment takes a lot of help, and we've had BRMs engaged, and they've been meeting with data owners. So I think we're doing good. Yeah.
Do you need any help in this area? Or do you all feel like you've got the resources and manpower to
Well, as I mentioned during my presentation, due to the hiring freeze, we still have one vacant position on John's team that needs to be filled. So our hope is sometime in November we can double the size of John's team. And currently he's a one-person team.
Yeah, to make it
So obviously, resource is a constraint. But there are a couple of things. We're trying to be creative and use innovation, to address this type of issue. And understanding, NTT Data's recommendation, does require lots of effort from the agency. So, but I think I want to summarize that during Q1, what we're trying to do is going through the exercise to understand what do we have as an agency to identify the removable devices, all the data sets and application. We also get lots of help, from agency staff, like the data owners and application owner. We also leverage, what John mentioned, the business relationship manager. So John's one-person team, but he definitely gets help, from the management team, business units, and the rest of the ISS division. So,
Well, at least in the private sector, this whole area is starting to rise to be, and I'm talking about, and you're nodding your head, but at the board level, because it is something that if you have some serious problem, it goes right up to the board. And so I just want to make sure that we're devoting the
Yes, actually.
resources and people to, how do you feel about that, Ms.
You'll
Beck?
recall that I reported to you all that we received a significant cut to our administrative budget for FY 18-19 during the last legislative session. And as a result, we were concerned that we were going to have to take some significant cuts from IT, which is the area in which we need more resources. So what we did at the end of FY 17 in building our FY 18 budget was we looked at other areas in which we could contribute unexpended funds and other resources to IT so that we make sure we prioritize those functions. And I'm pleased to say that other divisions, including, David and his budget and internal audit and general counsel and my office, we all identified those funds to try and support some of those expenditures. We also did receive some funding from the legislature for this purpose to improve our security here at the agency. And so we identify this as one of the high priorities, which is also why I felt that we needed, when I first took over this position, that we needed a standing agenda item to report to the board on our major IT projects so that you're aware of our progress such as this and in other critical areas. So I'm very pleased with the changes that Ms. Sun has had under her leadership. She's really done a remarkable job in a short period of time serving in this role, and she's starting to really see some good outcomes from all of that work and strategic planning and so forth. So I feel we're headed in the right direction. And part of this, I should mention that Mark's team, the internal auditors, did an excellent job in reviewing some of these areas as well, and provided an audit report that had some recommendations overlapping with NTT Data. And so we are responding to those as well. And I think the key is changing the culture here to ensure that everybody who touches data, personal identifiable data, knows what their responsibilities are. And part of that training and awareness, what's key is that people see specific examples of how it pertains to their work and how they know it when they see it, that there's a problem that they need to address or bring to the attention of ISS and John Howson. So I'm pleased with the direction that we're heading.
So, yeah, going once again to the private sector, but these corporate boards are saying that it's probably a responsibility of the board of directors to be briefed on this. They're saying at least twice a year.
Yes.
And,
And so we're talking to you quarterly about these issues.
I like that it's on the agenda a lot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I was just going to make a comment.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Mr. Steen, I agree with you. I think this is a very important area that we need to monitor. As I watch the agenda here on my computer, my new computer, I have a pop-up that just comes, a secure connection cannot be established with the server. Do you want to continue? I mean, these are things that happen like everywhere. So this is, I mean, obviously something that's extremely important.
Yeah.
So I will continue to do the agenda online. But I thought I'd point that out.
Thank you.
Ms. Sun, thank you for your report. Mr. House, thank you for all your work on this. And, you know, I know you could use more help on this, but we appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
We plan to have an exceptional item request for more support next session.
Okay, the first item under Finance is a review of the year-to-date fiscal year 2017 financial report. This item does not require any action. Ms. Battles. Oh, and also Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to take a little bit of a different approach today on Ken's financial report. We received some feedback from the board about the financial report. I think some of you may have felt that it might be too quick and not enough time is spent on connecting the dollars to the agency's priorities, that the dollars really should tell the story about what's important to us and so forth. So we want to take a
Where
little
did
bit.
you get that feedback? Because
I'm sorry?
You said you got that from the board?
We did through the commissioner's performance evaluation. So the commissioner did share that portion with me, and I in turn then met with Ken, and we talked about how we could respond to your feedback in a constructive way, and we are always open to your suggestions. So if we're not actually addressing your feedback appropriately, please let us know, because we'd like to make sure that we're giving you the information that you want and in the manner that you want.
That's appreciated that you picked that up and that you acted on that. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So can we get to the first slide? Oh, I have it. Somebody snuck it in front of me. So we thought we'd start with this flow chart, because I think it really shows how our financial report that Ken's going to be presenting later, how it all ties back to how we come up with and how the board adopts the priorities for the agency. So keep in mind that the report that Ken is going to be presenting is the last report for FY17. It's the year-end report that really focuses on, okay, what went unexpended and why, and so forth. But in order to turn back the clock and see where all of the groundwork was laid in terms of identifying the priorities, you've got to go back to January of 2014 when we began the agency strategic planning process. And this was in preparation for the 2016-17 biennium, which just ended August 31st of 2017. So it can get confusing. So if you go back to that top square where it talks about agency strategic plan, we started the agency strategic planning process in January of 2014, and then the board adopted that strategic plan in June. And the legislature requires us to every state agency to develop an agency strategic plan for 5 years, and then it identifies what our agency needs to be doing on a daily basis, what are our goals, and so forth. We also have our state plan, our higher education plan. At that time, we were under closing the gaps by 2015. So we had 4 goals, which was to increase participation, increase success, increase institutional research, and excellence. So what we do is we take the goals of those plans, and then we develop, in between developing our LAR, which goes to the board, went to the board in July of 2014. We take into account those priorities, and then anything that costs us money, anything that we know is going to require additional funds from the legislature, we then include in our LAR. And also, at that same time, we're developing policy recommendations. And so if there's a cost estimate associated with a particular policy estimate, as a policy recommendation, we incorporate that into our LAR through our exceptional item request. So then in July, you adopted our LAR for the 16-17 biennium. It went through the 2015 legislature, and then we ended up with the General Appropriations Act for 16-17. And as you know, the legislature doesn't always accept what our recommendations are. So they have their own projects that they want funded, and so that'll end up in our budget, something that a legislator wants to fund, a program or something that may not align with our agency strategic plan or our higher education plan for the state. So you'll have a mix in there. So then that's what dictates, the General Appropriations Act is what dictates our annual budget, operating budget, which for the FY16 annual operating budget you adopted in July of 15, and then for FY17 you adopted in April of 2016. So what I'm trying to do is just lay the groundwork for you to kind of get your mind around how these priorities are identified, and we're really looking backwards. So almost 4 years ago were these decisions being made in terms of identifying those priorities. Since then, we've been through this cycle again for the 18-19 biennium, based on a new agency strategic plan and based on 60 by 30 text. So when you see me come in the spring, late spring, early summer, to talk to you about our legislative appropriations request for 2021, that's going to be based on our goals in 60 by 30 text, and then whatever changes we make to our agency strategic plan. So is that clear as mud?
No, I think this is good, the way you kind of backed it, because this gives us a good perspective. I don't know, maybe only one person. This is good for me to see the planning and what we're going forward, and learning really what the process is like going back.
Good.
So I think this is good, because a lot of boards and folks plan, the future, but you don't go back and see, missteps or the cycle. So
Right.
this is very good. I like
Right. And just as a reminder to those of you who were here in 2014 when we developed our LAR, some of the exceptional item requests that we highly prioritized, we actually had 24 items, totaling about $300 million. But our top priorities at the time were financial aid, which is always the case, Texas grants, TEOG, work study, but we also had funding for our IT, protecting our security, upgrading our security infrastructure. And we didn't get all of that money. We got some of it that went to DCS and not here for the infrastructure here. During that legislative session. We also had requested more money for, healthcare programs like GME and so forth. We requested more money for TRIP, the Texas Research Incentive Program. Again, kind of all aligned with Closing the Gaps 2015 and our agency's strategic plan from 2014. So at this point, what I want to do is any more questions or comments before I move on to Ken, so then he can kind of give you the analysis of where we're at in terms of the end of fiscal year 17, what remained unexpended and why. And then we also had, as Ms. Sun mentioned, a governor's hiring freeze in January of this year. And what did that mean in terms of how much money did we save as a result of that and give back to the comptroller?
No, I thought that was a very helpful introduction. So do we want to move to Mr. Martin?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And as you have the report in front of you, this is for the fiscal year 2017. This will be the last report for this fiscal year. In January, I will present the first report, thank you, for fiscal year 18. And Mr. Stedman earlier noted on this report that it still had the structure of closing the gaps. And you'll note, as Ms. Battles mentioned, that there is a lag in that process. And so, yes, this is the last year of the structure because it represents the last year of that strategic plan, which was done before the one you just saw there. The one you saw for 2014 was for 60 by 30. So in 2018 report, coming in January, you will see the nomenclature, if you will, for the grouping of our programs. We'll have the 60 by 30 strategic plan nomenclature on there, just of note. And also, as Ms. Battles mentioned, we did have the hiring freeze for the governor based on January 31st. As of noon, the governor implemented a hiring freeze in 2017, which ran through the end of the fiscal year. So that did have an impact, as Ms. Soon mentioned, for ISS as well as other divisions. Basically, as you had attrition, you couldn't backfill individuals, and you'll note that. And that's part of what we lapsed back to the comptroller. So this was in the form of both general revenue as well as loan funds, because we have our loan program. Some of the admin as well as the administration of the loan program is covered through loan funds. Of note also...
But Ken, the loan program money goes back to the top fund, correct?
Goes back to the loan program.
So it doesn't go to the comptroller's office. So just, we lapsed, do you have a breakdown for how much general revenue?
We lapsed approximately $500,000 of that 1.17 million. About approximately 500,000 was general revenue, which tax revenue goes back to the comptroller into their general fund, and then the remainder, approximately 600,000, went back into our student loan fund, and that will be.
Yeah, excuse me. How would a hiring freeze cause money to lapse in the bond program?
Well, because it went across the entire agency, irrespective of the funding source, whether you're funded with federal funds, loan funds, general revenue, any position is a budgeted position, and any position that is paid out of appropriated money, and all those budgets were frozen. So a lapse from the state's perspective is the budget. So we lapsed budget that they authorized us to spend, and we had in our agency operating budget, as Ms. Battles mentioned in her presentation. And if somebody traded in February, say, approximately halfway through the year, then we would have half of that salary savings that we had to dedicate, set aside, if you will, due to the governor's hiring freeze, which the state then wanted that back.
So with respect to the bond funds, it's really an allocation of sort of indirect cost. In other words, it wasn't like you lost a person that was dealing with collections, and therefore you didn't have that, you couldn't replace that person.
We did. We had people at TRID in the loan program itself that administers the loan program. They're paid out of loan funds, but they're budgeted. And those positions we were not authorized to backfill. We did finally receive some authorization for some positions, temporaries, that we could bring in to help us out because of volume that was increasing, but we had to get governor permission to do that, and that came much later in the year. So we did have some savings there, but as Ms. Battles mentioned, the cash, there's the budget, and that goes away. The cash component goes back into the bond fund, goes back into what we call the loan funds. There's two discrete buckets. And it goes back. So it can be utilized again. It stays and is retained within the loan program, and that's what we're trying to point out. The agency didn't lose those funds. We just weren't authorized to spend a portion of those last year.
The governor's the governor's order, when he issued his freeze, essentially said any positions, new or vacant, cannot be filled if you are using appropriated funds. And because our loan program funds are appropriated, they're under the other category. So you got general revenue dedicated, and you've got federal, and then you have other. So those other funds are appropriated to us, and we pointed out, we worked with the governor's office to get clarification. Do you really mean that we cannot fill positions that are funded through the loan program? And they said, yes. If it's appropriated funds, you cannot do anything with that position. And we pointed out, well, that's not going to save the state any money because it's not going back to the state treasury. But the I think the desire was just to limit the growth of state government during that period, and whatever savings we could give back to the state, we could.
So you all had the same question that Mr. Stedman's
Yes, sir.
asking, enough that it was, you actually sought clarification
Yes,
with
sir.
the governor's
Yes.
office on it.
Yes, and as Ken mentioned, we later, when we started to see that we were going to have the peak season for loan programs, we sought a waiver from the governor's office to go ahead and hire some loan processing folks to help with that increase in volume. And of course, the governor's office was very accommodating, because they did not want to hurt students and the ability for students to borrow a loan, and they didn't want to slow down that process because of this hiring freeze. Yes, sir.
Is that perfect? The other item on here just below is our Beyond Time program. As we've mentioned a couple times, and especially in our legislative appropriation request or the legislative session, that this is basically being phased out, and the final phase out will be in 2020 based on House Bill 700 from the 84th. And we had $19 million lapse there. That was a combination of GR and GRD. The bulk, approximately $18 million, was GRD, and approximately $1 million was general revenue. The general revenue will go back to the state treasury, and the $18 million will go back to the Beyond Time account. If you recall, this program is was funded by tuition set-asides. So the institutions are setting aside a portion of students' tuition and then sending that to the coordinating board to then deposit into an account to provide loans to students. The funding in that account was greater than what we were appropriated or authorized to expend, and so the account has grown. In 2020, any remaining funds in that account will be distributed back to the institutions, allocated back based on the methodology outlined in House Bill 700. So I just want to note that $18 million, similar to the loan funds, the bond loan funds, the cash did not go to the Treasury for the general revenue dedicated component, approximately $18 million. It remains with the coordinating board. We're not authorized to expend it. We don't have the budget, but we do have the cash, and which is a good thing, because ultimately those funds will go back to the institutions for their use later on in 2020. And this is an example of a program, as Ms. Battles mentioned before in her presentation, that sometimes we make recommendations in our LAR and they are adopted by legislature, and sometimes they are not. We did try and maintain this program during that session, of which they did not adopt our recommendation, and so it was being phased out. The next one, the top 10.
Mr. Martin, so I was going to suggest that, because we're slipping off our schedule, so you were just planning to go through on each one of these lapses, and we can do that if y'all want to hear it, or we could ask if there's any questions on any of them.
Absolutely. I'm happy to answer any questions on these or anything else contained within the report if you like.
Yeah, I'd like to hear the top 10% scholarship one, because that sometimes I get questions.
Would you like to hear all of them, or just the top 10%?
Top 10%.
All right.
Well, this one was a program that we did recommend for closure and to reutilize the funds in our other grant programs. This program, when it was initially established, was well-funded, and it was able to serve students at approximately $2,000 per award, so fairly substantial to provide students some aid, and it was in play for quite a while. There were budget cuts over time, and this program did dwindle. Demand in the program increased, and awards were approximately $500, significant, all in 1/4 what they used to be, which from a student standpoint wasn't as substantial as it used to be. And we felt that this program would better serve, since demand was increasing, dollars were, from our expectation, going to continue to be flat or decreasing, to then utilize the remaining funding better used in our other grant programs, which they did, and they are phasing out this program as well. So similar to the Beyond Time, this is only funding renewal students. We do provide on both programs estimates to the Legislative Budget Board before each session, so they take our estimates and then fund us at those. And so we do have conservative estimates in there, rightly so. We want to make sure we have enough funding to meet the needs of renewal students, and projecting attrition for renewal students is difficult. And so we're conservative on that attrition number to make sure that we have enough funding, of which, if we do not, it lapses back to the comptroller, which is fine by us. I'd rather have more money in lapse at the end of the year than be shortfall and not be able to provide scholarships or loans to students. Are there any other questions on this slide? Any other questions contained within the report itself? And I've provided on the blue page some detail, basically the same, very similar commentary, which you can read it at any point in time. Some of you may have already. So if you do have any questions on it, feel free to respond to Ms. Battles or myself. Also, if you have any comments on how we can improve this report, we try and provide you with enough information. Obviously, too much information can be disinformation. So we don't want to make this just a behemoth of a report that you don't even know where to go to. We're trying to give you succinct data and information that you can use. So if there are other items we could add, delete, or modify, feel free. We're open to it.
I think you've struck a good balance here. I think it's you're not overwhelming us with information, which you could do.
Great. I certainly can if you like.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I think the next 3 items all have to do with we're authorizing you to issue RFPs, right?
Yes, sir.
Is there much that goes into presenting that?
Let me, I've provided you quite a bit of data on each one of your blue pages, and as you look at them, the main points here, these are all related to...
Let me just go ahead and formally then introduce the next item under Finance's consideration of adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for proposals for the selection of a vendor for postage services relating to the student program. So that's the first one.
Yes, and this, we have a considerable amount of postage that we utilize for the loan program because we are required to send out certain disclosures, notes, et cetera, even in this electronic world for collections and just general operations. In 2017, we expended... The number of pieces of mail were 897,000, a little over that number, and we expended approximately 361,000 at a cost of about 40 cents each per piece. And as you know, the postal per stamp is around 49 cents. So we do go out for RFP. DIR, Information Services, has a master service agreement with several vendors, and we leverage those master service agreements. But since there are multiple master service agreements, we have to go out for an RFP to have them respond back on their pricing, of which we select predominantly based on price. And we try and leverage a bulk discount by doing this.
Just to clarify, so you go out for an RFP, when you get those proposals, do you come back to us with a recommendation?
That is
and
correct.
we have to approve that?
On the next 3 that I'll or the next 2, including this one that I'll discuss, that is the intent that in April we would present to the...
We get the majority approval
Oh,
on
excuse
these?
me. Yes.
So what we do is the committee and the board will adopt this, and then we'll go out for an RFP, and when we make a selection, we'll then email you as chair of AOC, the board chair and board vice chair, and get majority approval from the 3 of you.
That's the way it's done.
Yes,
All
sir.
Of which then in April we'll come back and present the results.
right. Okay. Do I have a motion? And this would be... well, I read it, but adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for proposals for the selection of a vendor for postage services relating to the student program. Do you have a motion? So moved by Mr. Stedman. Second by Dr. Frias. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So the next item under Finance is consideration of adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for proposals for selection of a vendor for financial advisor for the students' agency, for financial advisors for the agency student loan program. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This is similar to the previous. We're requesting to issue an RFP, and this is for a financial advisor. I've come to this board approximately 2 years ago, and recently for a one-year extension that we had on the prior contract. That contract will end at the end of this fiscal year, 8/31/2018, and this is a request to issue an RFP for solicitation for a financial advisor for the period fiscal year 2019 and 2020. As you know, we have the student loan program. We issue bonds where we approved a resolution in July for approximately $2 million. We're looking to issue maybe $170, maybe $180 million of bonds in January. And we leverage our financial advisor, who various different ones out there, but our financial advisor for the expertise to help advise us, timing, markets, structure, rates, et cetera. And this is to get an RFP to go back out and solicit in financial
And our current
advisor.
financial advisor in
Is
this
First
area?
Southwest, a subsidiary of Hilltop Securities.
Say it again.
First Southwest,
All right.
which is a division of Hilltop Securities.
And what do we pay for this service?
Let's see, I have in here, I think we've paid approximately $100,000 per year.
And it's a fixed fee?
It is a fee, the portion of the fee that we pay for financial advisors relating to the bond issue, and I can't go into specifics on pricing because that is proprietary for the vendor, and I sign a non-disclosure when we evaluate these, but it is typically a tiered pricing structure based on the amount of bonds that you issue. And it's similar for bond counsel as well.
So is it up to a certain amount, or I thought you said it was 100,000?
100,000, but what I'm requesting is to issue an RFP up to 300,000 for a 2-year period. So that'd be it would allow us flexibility of 150,000 per year,
Okay,
just in
Doctor.
case, depending on the size of a bonds issue. Correct. We came to the board with the results, and the board recommended or asked if there were other actions we could take in our purchasing department, working with the Office of General Counsel. And we went back, tried to take as many actions, advertise. We did direct, I'll call it direct marketing, direct emailing to various entities that we knew that worked in this space. It is a little unique, both bond counsel and financial advisor in this, because student loan industry is very small. If, as you all know, in 2010, the federal government took the student loan federal side, which is at $1.4 billion. Federal loans represent $1.3 billion. So the private industry is approximately $100 billion. That's not a big number. So, trillion, 1.4 trillion. Feds represent 1.3 trillion, and then 100 billion is on the private side, of which we play in. So it is a limited space and a limited area of expertise for both the legal side as well as financial advisory services. There's plenty of financial advisory services for investments and other areas which are much more robust, but in our area, in the student lending side, it is
Mr.
small.
Martin, you said that last time, though, you made some extra effort to try to get the word out. Are you going to do that this time, or have you been doing it?
Absolutely. We have identified 11 vendors that work in this area and have some area of expertise, so we'll solicit those. We'll also follow the standard state guidelines. We need to follow our standard procurement guidelines, and we issue to the state electronic business daily, and this is an internet-based website posting state bid opportunities. It's administered by the comptroller. We will post to the state Central Master Bidders List, which is a similar item. And we will post in the Texas Register as well as on our own website, and we will try and do a direct, I'll call it marketing campaign, for lack of a better word, to specific entities as well. And Mr. Farias, as you recall, we received 2 bids, 2 qualified bids from that area.
Exactly what you planned.
That is correct. I can't guarantee you a different outcome, but we certainly will ensure that we have tried to touch base and reach out to as many as possible.
Dr. Frias, is that a good plan in your mind?
That's a great plan.
Thank you. And we remember.
Any other questions or discussion, or do I hear a motion? All right, so there's a motion by Dr. Frias, and this is to approve request for proposals for the selection of a vendor for financial advisory for the agency's student loan program. So it's a motion by Dr. Frias and the second by Mr. Anwar. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. So the last item under finance is consideration of adopting the staff's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for proposals for selection of a vendor for bond counsel relating to the performance of legal services for the agency for the student loan bond program. Mr. Martin.
Thank you. And this is similar to the previous agenda item, but it's for our bond counsel, as I've mentioned. This is an item that we utilize for leverage for administration of our loan program, issuing bonds. It is key. We have IRS constraints that we need to make sure we maintain. We have Security Exchange Commission constraints, municipal board constraints, state statute, and constitutional, as well as a litany of other consumer lending, et cetera, that we need to make sure that we follow. So it is critical that we have the right advice, maintain the right program, and have the long-term viability. This is for bond counsel. We're requesting for a 2-year period. The current extension, which you approved previously, expires here at the end of this fiscal year, and it would be for the fiscal year 2019 and 2020 terms. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Again,
Our current firm is whom?
McCall, Parkhurst, and Horton, and we had Mr. Richard Donahue here in July, who helped present the bond resolution that you all.
And what have we paid them?
We pay them anywhere from $150,000 to $150,000. That does vary a little bit. There is a component related to issuance of the bonds, and there's variable fees. And then there is just the standard advice. So outside the bond issue, if we need advice, if the IRS wants to perform an audit and we need their support, we get an SEC inquiry, anything like that, or just general advice, then we do have there will be a fee associated within our contract for that. So it can vary.
So what is the reason?
I can. 150 would give us around 300,000, but again, because I can't predict if we'll have an IRS. We did the agency, I think around 2010, 11, I believe, had an IRS audit on a bond series, 2000 bond series, and it's a considerable amount of time. It's very difficult to predict the amount of legal services you'll need. Where financial advising is more limited to the bond issue, the bond counsel is not only the bond issue, but also the continued maintenance of the program, all the prior bonds that you've issued, et cetera. Financial advisor, once you've issued the bonds, they really don't get into play unless you're looking to refund or refinance some old bonds at higher rates. But bond counsel continually is helping us with IRS interpretations. The IRS was, SEC, was coming out with a proposed rule change of which we had responded to. We worked with our bond counsel as well as a comptroller in their office to come up with responses to, I think, are critical to make sure that we're being involved in those areas. But there's a cost to it, and that cost does vary. I would if we had the flexibility that could meet the timing of the program. So if we went with 300,000, 150, this for a 2-year period, just similar to the other. So if we had 150,000 each year and that'd be 300,000, you want to limit it to 300,000, I'm more than amicable to that. It's your decision. As long as if there was an item that came up, we had the flexibility that could be fairly quick, because if we had to go to a quarterly board meeting, but we need to meet an IRS or some SEC or some other type of inquiry, we need information quickly, it's difficult to wait for the next board meeting based on timing.
When you have like double the amount, I would feel comfortable if the board chair.
Absolutely. I'm more than happy to.
Do we follow the same procedure on this as we do the financial advisor in terms of getting it approved? It comes back to that group?
Yes, sir, it
Okay.
does.
Okay.
And just to mention, if the flexibility part of it, the board can always call an emergency called board meeting, and it could be done via conference call, so it could occur very quickly if we need to. So if you feel more comfortable going with 300 million as opposed to 400 million, we do have that
400,000.
flexibility.
400,000.
I mean, I'm sorry.
We're going to get a lot of lawyers interested in
Sorry,
this.
yes, 400,000. Sorry. Yes, thank you for the correction. 400,000, yes.
Well,
So
I
if,
think
is
just
that,
like anytime it's double or more, it's just something to consider at least with.
We can absolutely do that.
I think
Whatever
you're not talking about
prefer.
sort of anything really formal, just a call to let us know.
Yes,
Sure.
yes.
Yeah,
I understand
that's easy enough.
Your
yeah.
timelines and all too, and that. was
Absolutely.
the call and the committee were.
We'll happily commit to that.
Absolutely.
What about as far as getting the word out, like we talked about with the financial advisor? You're going to take those,
We will
do those
take
extra
the same
steps?
steps we mentioned there, including trying to identify specific legal firms that perform this type of service. There are firms that work in bonding, what have you, but very few that work in student lending
Right.
bonding, and because it's all, you're only supporting
Yeah, bond
private.
being, this bond counsel, it's a specialty, but this is sort of a subspecialty.
It's a subspecialty
I mean, it
within.
is a subspecialty within that area.
It really is. I mean, you know, you can help issue tax-exempt bonds. Maybe, you know, you're working with the housing authority, but the difficulty is when you get in the student lending, you have all those other types of requirements that I discussed earlier, SEC disclosures, IRS requirements to make sure those tax-exempt. You could lose your tax-exempt status on those bonds if you don't follow all the proper procedures and requirements, and so it is critical that we maintain that. That is correct. We had McCall Parkhurst up until wrote it too small. We had McCall Parkhurst we have had them for 43 years total, 1966. So imagine that beginning of the program to 2002, and then they recently were back 2012 through 2018. And we've had one, that is correct, 2003. I believe so. I wasn't here or in this role during that time, but I believe so. I remember we had different ones. So it is limited, and I bring that up again because it is, as I present in April the results, it is a difficult item to find expertise in this area. And unfortunately, the student lending area is not necessarily growing. It had been contracting since the federal government took a lot of these items private.
Just to comment, I'm sure you will come to the right conclusion, but just from my perspective, you know, it's good to go out for proposals to keep everybody honest, but get the right person. This is, I mean, they're the right group on both financial advising and the legal, because this is too big of a deal to pinch pennies on, and that's just my perspective.
And I think I paid you to say that, right? Because under Texas Government Code 1201.027 is authority of issuer to contract for services, and issuer meaning a bond issuer. And one of the items it talks about here is, let's see, it basically states that though pricing can be a consideration,
Right,
and
it's
this is
not
not a quote, experience should be taken into account. And I mean, it is very prescriptive, and it is saying just that, and we do. And so we look at both pricing, we look at years of experience, experience in the industry. Is it a bond counsel that doesn't have any student lending industry experience? And if we put that in the RFP as a criteria, then they wouldn't even qualify, et cetera.
Well, in the past, most of the proposals you've gotten are from recognized firms, right? You don't, or do you get outlier sort of?
No, I think there are very few proposals. That's really the issue. But they are from recognized firms. Sometimes we'll get them from much smaller firms or advisory entities.
But Mr. Stedman has a good point. We want to get the right people, and not, we're not just going to take the low bidder or something on something like this.
Absolutely.
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, can I just make
Sure.
one mention here? In your blue page, it says that these bonds are backed by the full credit of the state and got AAA rating as of December 2016. And didn't we just get AAA rating for the more recent bond series?
We did. Both S&P and Moody's yesterday issued their ratings, of which we forward on to the Bond Review Board as part of our notice of intent for their board meeting, which we have to apply for and go before. And we received AAA from both Moody's and S&P, which were what we received previously as well. They note in there that the state has good growth, good financial growth. They do note the risk of oil, the decline in oil and oil tax revenue, but some of that being offset by sales tax revenue and the growth of population coming into Texas. And then they do note Hurricane Harvey and the potential implications that are a little bit unknown financially to the state, but they do quote a lot of information of money coming from the federal FEMA and various other sources that should well assist the state in not having to use significant state resources. Plus, they also noted a lot of local resources will be utilized in the recovery efforts.
All right. Is there any further discussion, or do we have any other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion. Okay. Moved by Mr. Stedman, seconded by Dr. Frias. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Martin. The first item under internal audit is discussion regarding pros and cons of auditor rotation for external audit of agency-wide financial statements. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pale.
Good afternoon. So this is a discussion item only, and it's actually a return to a discussion that we had in 2013 at an agency operations committee meeting, and I know that that most of you were not here at that time. So Chairman Steen asked that I brief you regarding external auditor tenure in the context of this agency's long-running relationship with KPMG as its external auditor. In your materials, there are two documents that accompany this discussion. One is called Consideration of External Auditor Rotation, and then there's a second document, External Audit of Agency Financial Statements, Historical Perspective. And the brief discussion that I have that follows are pulled from the two documents that you have.
Mark, can I make one correction?
Sure.
So the first document is titled Pros and Cons of External Auditor Rotation, since it's not a consideration item, an action item.
Thank you.
So the title was changed, so apologize for that.
Tell me again, what are the two that we're looking at?
Right behind the blue page for agenda item 6A, and it's a white page that's titled Pros and Cons of External Auditor Rotation.
Oh, yes. Okay, I've got it. Has everybody
And
got
then the
it?
next one right after that. And in the future, by the way, we're going to try and number all of these pages so it's easier to
Refer to.
All right. Okay. Go ahead.
First, at a high level, the debate is whether or not an external auditor can get too comfortable in a long-standing audit relationship with the client. Those who advocate this position state that when the auditor gets too comfortable, they become less skeptical and they lose their objectivity, or at least it can become compromised after many years auditing the same client. The counter perspective to this is that it takes typically several years for an external auditor to understand a client's operations, environment, and complexity to be well-versed enough to critically evaluate an organization. Thus, from this standpoint, a term limit placed on an auditor results in less productive audits because of the learning mode, and critical issues could go unnoticed due to auditor inexperience. And there's some similarities to the previous discussions that you've been having about financial advisor and bond counsel in terms of just the criticality of the audit organization understanding a complex operation like our loan operation is. So KPMG, our current external auditor, has been with the agency since 2006, with the contract having been competitively reprocured 3 times since 2006. This past July, because of the 10-year auditor length of time in KPMG's firm policy, the engagement lead partner changed to promote auditor objectivity. So that was at KPMG's own internal policy that they rotated the engagement lead partner. What does the industry say about auditor tenure? This was hotly debated from 2002 to 2014 on the heels of a lot of the highly publicized business and audit failures like Enron. And the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board and the GAO both studied this issue, and both of those groups ultimately backed away from mandatory firm rotation due to lack of evidence to support that you get a better audit with a fresh set of eyes. However, as sort of a compromise position, or I guess to try to get the best of both worlds, the PCAOB did require that SEC-registered companies rotate their lead engagement partner at least every 5 years. So this is somewhat similar to KPMG's approach for us being a non-SEC client, except in this case it's 10 years instead of 5 years that KPMG is going by. So in conclusion, the thought is that from a policy standpoint, we probably need to develop a policy that addresses, at a minimum, the lead partner rotation issue or cooling off period, if you will. That could be anywhere from probably on the short side every 5 years. On the long side, probably not more than 10 years, perhaps somewhere in between. Certainly willing to hear your feedback on that issue. One thing to consider is that the shorter that interval becomes, potentially the more that could translate to increased cost for the external audit, because a firm even the size of KPMG, as you see with the current engagement partner that has replaced Ms. Warren, that partner is brought in from another office because they're looking to capitalize on industry experience, and so that industry experience oftentimes for an office like an Austin office is only one partner deep. So the more often, the more frequent you require that rotation, the more likely that they're going to be bringing in somebody from another city or potentially another state to staff the engagement, and they may therefore up their bid in subsequent years. So that's another aspect to be considered.
Well, we've talked about this. Of course, I've come down on the side of encouraging auditor rotation. That important element that you want your external auditors to be skeptical, and when you've got the same people working with the same people, it's just sort of human nature. And also, if it's the same people doing it year after year, one of the things you want to do is to sort of look at things with new eyes. They get used to sort of looking at the same things, and you want maybe somebody new coming in will look at it a different way, perhaps uncover something that the previous auditor didn't. So, but I just went through this with another board that I'm on, and the way we worked it out was actually to throw it back to the staff to say, would you come back with us with your recommendation?
Sure.
And where we came out, we just did this very recently, but where we came out was on 5 years to rotate, just like KPMG is doing. The lead partner rotates after 5 years, and then we would encourage. Is it? Well, no. This is what we did on this other board.
I was referring to KPMG. I think they do it every 10 years.
Right. So, yeah, well, so we came down on 5 years, and then every 10 years to endeavor to maybe go to a different firm. So I think we said that in our policy, unless there were compelling circumstances. And this was for municipal utility, and that's a specialty, and so there are not a lot of people that do that. So it could be like we were talking about earlier, Mr. Martin, where you just get one firm. If you have this, if it's mandatory to rotate, then you put yourself in a bind. So you say that you'd like to rotate it every 10 years unless there are compelling circumstances not to do it.
We'll be happy to develop a policy that that addresses the issue, and I think it would be important that we do leave ourselves an out in the event that that there aren't others with the type of expertise that we would need to audit our loan program.
I guess one thing in your assessment recommendation, it seems like, and I don't know it completely, but and I really haven't studied the audit that thoroughly. But I don't think they're. I mean, why I get comfort that we have an external auditor for the coordinating board is just to make sure that kind of the money is there and it's going in the right places. In other words, that the tests are more procedural and mechanical, as opposed to like Enron, where it was a big revenue recognition thing. So they would take, 20 years of projected revenue, take the present value and maybe risk it and bring it into revenue. I mean,
Right.
current year. I mean, that's a huge judgment issue. So if in your assessment, I mean, it seems like to me this is more of a mechanical testing type audit than it is big, like revenue or expense recognition issues, which really would require, I think, some kind of fresh eyes. But anyway, if you could just kind of look at the vulnerabilities, or what would fresh eyes actually do
Sure.
beyond just the mechanical when you come back with your recommendation?
Certainly. I think I agree with your assessment that there is a sort of a repetitive aspect to this project every year, to the opinion audit. Probably the one area that takes the most judgment and the most senior eyes from the external auditor is with respect to the loan program, and in particular, two facets of that: the allowance for doubtful accounts, because there's a judgment factor that plays in there, and then the information security that underpins the whole operation of the program. And obviously that's very complex and very risky, and so they have a lot of expertise in evaluating that. But the remainder of it, from an agency standpoint and what they look at year on year, is certainly, there's a kind of a template that they're
That almost any auditor could do.
right.
It's not a big judgment issue.
Correct.
Well, in a standard audit, the auditor's not looking specifically for internal control
That's correct.
deficiencies. But the idea is that in doing your audit, if you come across them, then you note them, and that ends up being in the
That's correct.
management letter.
And only for those financial statement items that are deemed material by the auditor. So there are many areas that get, there's no evaluation if it's not material.
For what it's worth, my opinion is I like to see a new set of eyes on it, and I like the shorter time span.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pell. That's actually kind of a complex issue, and you did a good job of summarizing it. That was pretty good. All right. So the last item under internal audit is an update on internal audit reports and activities, and this item does not require any action, Mr. Pell.
Thank you. We completed 4 internal audit projects since the July AOC meeting, and all 4 of those are in your packet, and none of those reports contained any findings or recommendations. And actually, one of the 4 is a statutorily required report. It's our annual report, and this report is required that we provide to the State Auditor's Office each year. And so you've actually seen the documents in that report in previous meetings in terms of our reports that were issued for the year, our audit plan, and so forth. So you should be familiar with those materials already.
All right, any questions or comments?
One other item, Mr. Steen, that I wanted to point out, we are very pleased that the commissioner was able to identify an additional position for our internal audit function. And
Important,
so,
that's great, yeah.
So we are moving forward with trying to recruit a qualified individual, and that will bring our internal audit staff up to 3 plus my position.
So just thank the commissioner for that, and also Ms. Battles, and that was something we were asking you all to do. Appreciate that very much.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years ago, we had a staff of 1 or 2, or it was for your arrival, so we've been growing.
Yes.
All right. So do you want to move to compliance monitoring?
Yes.
The first item under compliance monitoring is an update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. This item does not require any action. Mr. Pale.
For compliance monitoring, we completed 4 projects since the prior meeting in July, and you have each of those reports in your material. Just like on the internal audit side, there were no findings or recommendations. 1 project was formula funding related, and the other 3 were financial aid engagements. And also, like on internal audit for compliance monitoring, it's not a new position, but we were also impacted by the hiring freeze, and we lost a staff member during fiscal year 17, and so we're in the process of filling that position and hope to have that filled very soon so that we'll be fully staffed with 4 on our compliance monitoring team.
Good. So no findings or recommendations?
Correct.
Any discussion or comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Pale.
Thank you.
This concludes the Agency Operations Committee meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn? John Moore, seconded by Dr. Frias. All in favor, say aye. The motion carries. The meeting's adjourned.
So I don't know if you ducked out of that hall when there was a motion to appoint you chair of the gala, and I seconded it. Anyway, congratulations. That's going to be so fun. I mean,